Impressively, I read an NIH study before I even had my coffee this morning.
Wow.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jodi.
I'm Elliot. And today, Jodi brings you a really interesting story based upon an NIH study.
Yep.
As Jodi has taken pains to mention.
It's a for reals study.
A for reals
I get so irritated by science says.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
NASA admits.
This is real, and it's really fascinating about literal and figurative hills and mountains in front of you as a business owner. And I just love this.
It's one of my favorite episodes we've done in a really long time. And while, the downside to recording a week in advance, this is for us Thanksgiving week.
Yes,
this episode will come out next week. And I'm just feeling so grateful for the people who have reached out and joined the Facebook group. And I want to welcome a bunch of new people that we have. Mm-hmm. And I'm already going to tell you at least a few of these. I will botch their names, unfortunately. So all the more reason for these folks to get more active so that you can tell me how to say your name. But just in the past few days, we've had Brianna Vanstrom join, Pablo Gonzalez, Stephen Sharp, Sunny Wu. And then actually, I noticed we forgot last month to say welcome to our newest folks. So Rakim Chatterjee, Robert Lawson, Rebecca Obninsky, and Terry Kramer have all joined. So we have a pile of new folks. If you want to jump on in and join the fun, we can't offer you pie this week, but but soon we'll figure that out. You can text the word story to 345-345 to find out how to jump on in there. So let's take it away.
Okay.
So here's my story. I have this little morning tradition. It kind of gets my eyes awake where I don't look through emails and Facebook, but I do go to my Facebook memories and look back through, 1 year, 2 years, sure. 5 years. It's sometimes fun to just sort of see the passing of time and how January, I think I've mentioned this before. I realized through Facebook memories that I get weirdly depressed in January, which I didn't notice until weeks of looking back through Facebook memories. Anyway, today, hysterically, I shared a thing last year that I don't remember sharing at all. Don't remember reading it. Don't remember ever having heard of it. So that's a little concerning.
It's National Amnesia Week.
I know, right? But this is so lovely. I can't believe I didn't do an episode about it then. So I just wanted to bring it up. So there was, it was a guy looking for a study that he had read about, and someone had posted the study. So I went and read it this morning. Impressively, I read an NIH study before I even had my coffee this morning.
Wow.
I know,
that
right?
Says something.
I know.
You peaked. You can take the rest of the week off.
Yeah. Now I won't remember it apparently.
Well, no,
a month
apparently
from now.
not.
But so listen to this. This is just fascinating. And one last caveat: this is not one of those things scientists say, on Facebook, and then it's some Wahoo, whatever. This is an actual National Institute of Health, University of Virginia research.
You've established credibility.
A for reals scientific study.
Yes.
So check this out. This has to do with perception of slant, they call it, but sort of in layman's terms, how slanty, how hard is that hill? So this hill in front of you. So you're imagining a hill in front of you. Does that hill look really steep and AKA hard, or does it look less steep and not that hard? So it is about the perception of slant, whether you are looking at that thing by yourself, whether there is some other human beside you when you look at same slant. So it's almost like studying, what's it called? A visual, what's it? You're looking with a blank stare.
I need more than that.
Never mind. Optical illusion. That's what I was thinking.
Okay.
So it's because the slant is often the same. I mean, they switch it up so you don't see what's happening. But perception of slant when there's another human beside you, and then when there's another human that you have a relationship with, and of different lengths of relationship. So here's the punchline.
Okay.
When you have some kind of social support, and this is correlated to even more so if it's the person you trust and that you have a relationship with. When there is social support next to you, your perception of slant goes down. So
is that real? That's your perception of a physical slant goes down if you have emotional support next to you.
So forget all the sort of crazy study. I could have told the story really quickly this way. If I am looking at a hill in front of me and I am somehow asked to quantify how steep that hill is, I will report it looking less steep if anyone is beside me, and I will report it looking even less steep if someone that I have a relationship is standing beside me.
That sounds almost like it should be a relationship diagnostic, meaning if I'm looking at the hill and my wife is standing next to me and now I'm thinking, wow, that's a lot steeper than I thought it was. Then that seems like NIH is telling me that I have a problem.
I really hope Nikki does not listen to this episode. Sorry, Nikki. No, but and the way they even put this paragraph, I love that social support reduces psychological load.
It's really interesting because I can understand that if that's solely people's description of a non-physical challenge, like a mental challenge, this task or this
like
goal,
clean
or
the
whatever.
house.
Clean
if I think
the
about
house,
like I have to clean my whole house,
achieve this sales goal. I get the
right.
shared burden.
Many hands makes less work or whatever.
But it's really interesting that would go so far as to manifest itself when looking at a physical challenge.
It gets even more. I mean, this study is so fascinating because they go on to look at social support and the perception of challenges. So it says people tend to amplify their perception of negatively arousing objects and situations. For example, spiders are seen as looming closer by, I'm reading the wrong part there.
Now I want to know about spiders, though.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm like, in fact, I may have Tom cut this part out. But that just says, if you are, this makes perfect sense. If you're spider phobic, you think they look closer. So they're saying that your visual perception is affected by other things. So, don't cut that, Tom. That part out,
that makes a lot of sense.
You imagine them closer, but so this is how your brain fools you. So this is not anomalous, I guess, is what this important part is, and why you can keep it in, Tom. That if I'm afraid of spiders, I will report them as being closer and probably bigger and hairier and whatever.
Venomous,
if I'm afraid of them,
yes.
So your mind's perception of a thing impacts how much of a challenge you imagine it to be. So
even in the physical world, that's amazing.
Which is super important. And I will say, as a side note, I think super relevant right now in our political and social world that, if you have a perception of a thing, it seems as being bad, it seems bigger and scarier and yikesier and whatnot. But what I valued so much about this is that I started to say I jokingly, it's not joking at all. I use the phrases like it takes a village 5 times a day with friends and with my clients and with other business people when they weirdly feel bad about, whether they need actual support or whether they just need to vent or whether they need like someone to talk to because they don't have anyone to say a thing to. I will have people break down in tears at lunch. These aren't even clients. And then say the words like, I don't have anybody else I can tell that thing to. And, whether I'm saying it takes a village or whether I'm quoting that Seth Godin quote, like if you have a problem that you can't talk about, now you have 2 problems, or whether we're just sort of battling that pervasive nonsense of it's lonely at the top. I feel like now I have the scientific evidence of why this is so important and why it is. I just want to bust that wide open. Like when you are leading a thing and you can't talk about a thing, or you feel like you are standing there by, I get kind of emotional thinking about this. If you are looking at a challenge, and my God, starting, running, growing a business is nothing but looking at a hill in front of you. There is always a hill in front of you. And this just gives me like scientific evidence that hill is going to seem bigger and harder if you're standing there by yourself.
The evidence is right there in front of you, like the hill. But, I wrote down 3 things while you were talking because that occurred to me.
Were any of them relevant to the conversation?
They're actually relevant. The first one, because I was kind of analyzing how that manifests itself in my viewpoint. And one way is when I'm anticipating going to a trial. And trials are a lot of work and they're challenging. And I noticed that even in a trial that I can just do by myself, the exhibits aren't overwhelming, I don't need somebody there to organize, I enjoy it so much more and it seems so much less daunting. Not because if somebody like Lacey is there and we're doing it together, not just because we share the workload, but I mean the mental stress of it
Yes.
dramatically decreases when I know that I'm sharing the trial table.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way. The second thing that I wrote down is how I found years ago peer groups. I was in Vistage,
Yep.
as you know, and while there are good and bad, and I couldn't really take the input of new, different, and exciting ideas every month, and if I followed them, it'd be
that's
going
my
from
one
bumper to bumper like a pinball. But the really good peer groups where you establish those relationships can make the task of leading a company a little less daunting.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I wrote down to be just a little bit self-serving is that when we talked about the business depression, our episode very early on, one of the things that gets me out of a rut is going through these periods where I just start inviting people to coffee left and right, going through my network list. And not because I want to increase the business I'm getting from them or they're great prospects or how can we talk about increasing the relationship in 2020.
Who can I introduce you to
none of that stuff. It's just, I want to be sitting across the table from people I think are really interesting and cool. And that
gives you energy.
It gives me energy, and they're going through their own thing. They're working on their business, and it's a shared burden of progress and evolution. And that's what breaks me out of it. And now I can go back to the NIH and say, see, that's right.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the peer groups, because when I was reading this morning, I realized that, there are three of the biggest things that I do. I guess some part in me knew that it all came back to this so that somebody's not standing and looking at a hill by themselves. But all of a sudden it made so much sense because obviously my one-on-one work suits that purpose. I mean, that's no surprise.
Right.
I run roundtables for that same reason, because I actually think people can get more value out of more perspectives. I don't have the speakers for the exact reason that you say, because I think the last thing people need is more ideas most of the time. But just so they're not looking at that. And then also even the work that I do with people to create and grow the capacity of their own internal leadership team so that they're not the only person in their company who's standing there looking at this hill. And then you're having to sort of turn around and describe it back to people. So building in these layers of not being by yourself. There was one line in there that in that study that I thought was so powerful. They refer to it as psychosocial resources. So
psychosocial resource. Okay.
Yeah. So not being alone in a thing.
Yeah.
Psychosocial resources moderate your vision in a similar manner to physical resources. So actually having help moderates vision at a similar correlated way as psychosocial resources.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing
Isn't
to
it?
contemplate. Yeah.
I know. I just want to geek out on all these details and whatnot, but I don't want to sort of miss the forest for the trees here, because this is proof. I guess I get excited about this because my hope is that people will exhale and relax into what I know they can feel. I know that when I have somebody to talk to about a thing that I can't talk about with just anybody, I know that for me, I get such enormous relief and energy out of it. And I know that when I sit with someone who, whether it's because it's a confidential thing that they don't want to share with somebody else, whether it's because, we did that episode on somebody having a second question, whether it's, I have people say I have people I can talk to, but, I sort of tell them my thing and then they look at me blankly for a few minutes and then they're like, so anyway, because they don't understand your business enough to really be helpful, or actually worse, they think they understand your business and they start spouting off resources and help that you don't, that's not helpful. And so that I know people feel how good it feels to have somebody to rant to or talk to or whatever. And yet there's still all of this shame might be too strong of a word, but maybe not. Just embarrassment about even needing to get stuff off your chest. And, whenever someone says to me sorry, I know I'm ranting, I'm like, rant away. You get better out than in. You got to get that stuff out. And once it's out, then you can move forward. The hill doesn't seem so big.
Well, first of all, I have to mention that was really one of the guiding principles of starting the podcast.
Oh, 100. Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. I actually almost wanted to say that. Like, that's like this highest level, because, you and I can only talk to people, so many people in any given day. I wanted more people to feel like we're standing beside them.
Right. And we say right at the beginning, business is lonely. That's why we always say, pull up a chair, and
pull up a chair. Yeah.
And why our logo is what our logo is. And when we had a guest for the podcast in an episode we did not air, what that guest, who shall remain nameless, was saying is, you might want to, just as an aside, you might want to switch that logo. I don't know what the drink has to do with anything. And the drink has everything to do with the conversation. Yes. So,
although I did have somebody think, just based on our logo, that we were a Recovery Stories podcast.
Well,
I was like, okay, that makes sense.
But so one of the most comforting statements that I have had somebody who works with me in the firm say is, we were contemplating something. I don't even remember what it was. And she said, yeah, but that's not who we are. And I took real comfort from that, because of the we. That's not who we are. And it sounds so trite.
In that moment, it felt like she was standing beside you.
In that moment, she's standing beside, and she does. We work together, but it wasn't like, okay, well, and this, I don't run things like this way, but you're the boss and I'm just an employee. And I never think about that.
As evidenced by the fact that you have a caricature voice.
I do. I have a caricature voice. So I never think about that.
I'm the boss.
But I find myself, this is going to sound so odd, but I find myself so grateful for those statements. That's not who we are.
Yeah.
And that somebody adopts that, because things seem so much easier when somebody gives voice to that. And so what I really go to is when we're looking at moving forward, and I always think about moving forward, now that we're approaching a new year, is how would you go about, if you recognize the validity of NIH, of that NIH study in your personal experience, then what's the best way for you to go forward and figure out?
Yeah. Like if it eradicated that guilt. And so you no longer felt shame around it or embarrassment, or like you felt validated, and if not even like bolstered, and you're like, oh, it's super smart for me to have this. Like, right.
So if that's your goal, if you recognize that situation is what you want more of, then how do you get there? How do you find your people to stand shoulder to shoulder with you?
It's going to sound like it's a plant, but honestly, because I didn't think of this until you just said it, for real, that is why we started the Facebook group.
It is why.
So that because this version
I didn't say it for that.
I know, but this version, like, we started the podcast so that we could create more of a sense of not being alone for people. But again, it's just us talking outwardly. We created that Facebook group so that people would be able to, come together in a place where they could create even more of that sense of not being alone. So quick shameless plug there. You can go to Facebook, to our Facebook page, and there's a link to the group. You can also get a link to it by texting the word story to 345-345. I started to say band. That's how you get on my band list. That's not helpful right now.
Both story helpful, but not the
to
same.
345-345. But here's an interesting thing. It's someone to talk to. There are other ways to create it too. And so you may have to brace yourself. You can even put your fingers in your ears if you need to, Elliot, because this is almost a compliment. So just... But Christy, who does our show notes, was here visiting, as we talked about a little while ago. And while she did not get to meet you, we were talking about people in our lives. And I ended up telling a story about you that I still to this day find so unique, is that not only are you someone who I will tell things to when I'm having my moments, and I will talk to you about stuff, but you are so unique in that often when I talk to you about a thing, days later, like the next day or 3 days later, I'll get this email from you where it is clear that what we talked about has continued to like sit in your crock pot of like thinking. And you'll come back and say, hey, I was thinking, and it'll be paragraphs. Here's some other ideas for how you might do that. Or here are other ways to capture that thought that you were thinking of. Or here's something, blah, 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 blah. Maybe you thought of this, but blah. And the emotional experience of, oh my gosh, someone else is thinking about my thing, like when they don't have to, like not only were they helpful when I was sitting there talking to them, but then they went and gave like their own extraneous, extra curricular time to thinking about my thing and then wrote it to me and sent it to me. And she agreed. She was like, yeah, that's huge because it makes you feel not even less alone.
Well, the alternate explanation, though I appreciate that, is that I'm just the Internet Explorer of friends. I need about 3 days buffering time, and then I'll actually respond.
I knew you would reliably turn it not into a compliment. So that's why I was comfortable sharing it. But having people who will think about your stuff, who will that's what was so fascinating to this article is because what's important here, and I think I want to tackle this from the other side for a second. I think much like when you have a friend who has a profound loss in their life, a husband dies or, they lose somebody close to them. I think you often feel like you have to have the right thing to say, like you have to have something helpful or, at the very least, you just don't want to say the wrong thing. And I think one tiny reason people can feel lonely. There's a lot of reasons people feel lonely in business. But some part of it has to do with the reaction they get when they do try to talk to other people. And I think it's very similar is like if somebody's telling you something that's going on in their business, I think the immediate reaction for some folks is that they have to have something brilliant to say or helpful or useful. And one thing that I thought was important about this study, much like with a lot of the grief research that I read about, is it's not that. Like the person wasn't standing next to them and then giving like really useful math help on how steep the hill is. Like the person wasn't doing anything. They weren't saying a word. It was just presence. Simply having someone next to you changed your visual perception of how steep that hill is.
And you can tell the validity of this, not just from how you've seen it in your own life, but I would venture to say how the opposite is true, how mildly irritating it is when you know people for a while, but you run into them again and they don't seem to remember anything about any of your interactions. They're not your people and you have to remind them, we were on that 2-week rafting trip together.
Yeah.
I named my daughter after you.
Yeah. Yeah.
How irritating that is. Like they don't remember, even if you had a meaningful interaction with them. It wasn't just talking about, hey, your fourth quarter is looking solid. It was a meaningful interaction and they don't remember anything. And you realize they're not your people.
Right.
So I guess, as we're wrapping up, coming to a close for this episode, one thing that I would put out there is kind of a call to action. And that call to action would be, I would suggest that you just, to each of our listeners, think about the people that you really do envision standing next to you, contemplating the hill, whether they're in your company or outside, and then call them for coffee or figure out how long it's been since you called them, not for a specific reason, but just to nurture a relationship that can make those objects seem so much less daunting.
Yeah. And I would like to add just an even more personal one, which is if you can't think of someone if you can't think of somebody that feels like they're standing next to you in that, like looking at the hill of your business or your life or whatever. I'm not going to be so because I really want to be clear. This is not a just pitch to get in the Facebook group, but you can join the Facebook group if you want. You can reach out to us, but just as a personal invitation, send me a Facebook message. Like this is actually something that I was writing about yesterday that I've never before wanted to start a movement per se, but if there's one thing that I'm going to be thematically be working on and actually maybe even doing some research on in 2020, it is this function of and detriment of loneliness in business. Yeah. And it's something I want to understand the barriers about better. So if that is something like if I am lonely is something that happened that feels omnipresent for you, I would love to have a conversation, and I promise I will not sell you one blessed thing. I just want to understand this more so that we can start to untangle it.
Absolutely. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jodi Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.